Demigods, mortals, and monsters. Your favorite nerd, the DemigodLover, is back at it again. I'm sure many of you are wondering where I've been the past while. And I'm afraid that explanation will have to wait for a future video for somewhat complicated reasons. By the way, I have been posting on my community tab from time to time, so if I haven't been uploading and you want to know where I've been, you can always check that out. I know it's not really fair of me to dip out for so long and come back without an explanation, but unfortunately, said explanation will have to wait for a future video. I'm sorry about that. For today, let's focus on the topic of the video, the sun and the star. Though I will be going through the scenes in somewhat chronological order in this video, I will still be jumping through all parts of the book, so I suggest that you do not watch this video unless you have read the entire thing. Obvious spoiler warning ahead. Kind of a bummer that I never got to post a video with all my predictions for this book before it came out, but I have good news. Just before reading Sun and the Star, I chaotically recorded some of my predictions for it, so enjoy the following footage of me being an awkward disaster plus editor me's occasional comments about how right or wrong my predictions were. Hello demigods, mortals, and monsters. It's your girl, the DemigodLover here, and today I am about to read the latest Riordan book, The Sun and the Star, and I am so excited. Regrettably, I never got to make a video discussing my predictions for this book and everything, even though I would have loved to make so many of those. But since I could not have because life is busy and I hate it, I am instead going to hastily tell you all my predictions now and then get back to you after I've read the book. And then edit this video after I've already read the book and laugh at myself and then maybe put this in my review video. This video is, I'm gonna say right now, a complete mess because I have not filmed a video in over a year, which saddens me to like the depths of my heart. But I'm here now. So here we go. So what are my predictions for this book? First off with Nico. It seems like this book is really going to focus on his family, by which I mean the family he was born into, so like his dad and his sister, and I don't really know what to expect for that. I know there's going to be like a flashback scene. There's like a specially designated part of the book. If you saw the book being promoted on social media, you know. And I was casually flipping through the pages and I saw a few other small chunks of the book that also have this little strip of gray where the pages are darker. So there's going to be probably more than one flashback in this book and I can't wait for that. I'm assuming the major one is with Bianca because that was promoted on the Read Riordan page and everything, and I cannot wait. It's gonna be so sad though. So yeah, I assume this book is gonna deal more with like Nico's family and his relationship with his dad, because at the end of Blood of Olympus they were kind of starting in a healthy place. I mean, where Hades doesn't really know how to express it, but he wants Nico to be happy. And Nico still strongly resents his father, but is beginning to understand that his father can be right sometimes, and also understand that even if his dad is terrible at expressing it, he does care about Nico and wants him to be happy. That being said, I'm not so sure he's going to be happy about his son and his son's boyfriend going to Tartarus after he explicitly forbid anybody from doing that. So yeah, according to the map in the book, one of the locations is going to be Hades' palace, so we'll see how that goes. One of the locations is also going to be Persephone's garden. We'll see how that goes. What else? Yeah, I really don't know what to think about Nico's character development in this book. I don't know what to predict. My chair keeps... I'm sorry if you keep hearing like I'm an unscripted mess. What else was I gonna say? Right, Reina. So I don't know if Reina's gonna be addressing this book because she was not in like the promotional material for the book at all. She wasn't on any of the Read Riordan stuff or anything, and I really hope that her and her decision to join the Huntresses come up in this book because it's just so important. Like, Nico obviously still resents the Hunters, and his arc isn't complete if they haven't like addressed that. I'm not saying the book is gonna be bad if it's not mentioned, but like I hope they mention it at some point. It doesn't have to be the biggest focus, but I think it should be mentioned and it should be important, because if not, it's just gonna be like the elephant in the room this whole time, you know? I don't know what to expect in terms of Jason for this book. If I'm being honest, I don't really think Nico's character development is gonna revolve around Jason, because it seems like Nico has already gotten the appropriate closure. He's still very upset and very sad to have lost his friend, obviously, and I expect it to like come up in this book a few times because it's something that has recently happened to Nico that is probably hurting him a lot, but I don't expect it to really have much to do with the lesson or the meaning in this story, because while Nico is still grieving for Jason, he seems to already kind of know what he should and shouldn't do. He knows that he needs to remember Jason for the hero he was, but not try to bring him back or communicate with him. So while I'm sure he's still hurting a lot, it seems like Nico kind of already knows what the right thing to do in this situation is, so I can't really imagine that being a big center of his character development. But since we know that Bianca is going to be in this book, again, I'm waiting for Reina to be mentioned because she's essentially taken that big sister role in Nico's life. So that's something I think is important. I hope that I'm really looking forward to a book that actually focuses on Nico's connection with Will, but I hope that's not the only connection that Nico has that's treated as important. Like the book description says something like, you know, the one ray of sunshine in his life. And I love Will, but that's not entirely true, because Nico does have other people who have his back. Nico, I know you're probably kind of upset with Reina for joining the Huntresses, but that girl loves you, and I think you know she would do anything for you. Percy, again, I know you have a very rocky relationship with that guy, but you know what? Even after you betrayed him twice, he still just saw you as this kid who was lost and needed a little bit of help. He never once saw you as a villain, even when he had perfectly good reason to. So I know you have a challenging relationship with Percy as Jackson, who is also your former crush, but at the end of the day, the guy really cares about you, and he really wants you to be happy. Same with Hazel, and you know what? She has not done a single thing that would justify you being upset with her. So if you are mad at Hazel, don't be. She is like the sweetest thing. You don't even have a reason not to like her. She's been the best sister she can be to you. Don't even start, Nico. I don't know why I'm talking into my camera as if it's Nico D'Angelo. Anyways, yeah, I'm looking forward to this book, and obviously it's going to focus on Nico and Will's relationship, and I'm so excited for that, and I really hope it shows how they get together. In regards to Will, all I really need from you is a Will Solace backstory. I don't even care what it is. I need a Will Solace backstory. I wanted one in Tower of Nero, and then we didn't get one. I was like, okay, that kind of makes sense. Will is a side character. I mean, this isn't really his story anyway. He's not a main character in it. You know, it's disappointing, but it makes sense. And I can accept why it's logical for him not to have a backstory in this book, because he's not the main character. But now he is a main character, and apparently he's going to get a point of view. I know that with Riordanverse books, at least thus far, there isn't like a big difference for different characters, different points of view. It still kind of has the same style and humor, but there is a little bit of difference, and I really want to know like what's going through Will's head in this whole scenario. What else? What else? I wonder what Will's dynamic is going to be with Bob and Damison, because apparently they visit Damison's hut in this, and also their entire goal here is to go save Bob, so we're going to get both of our good buddies back, and I really want to know like what dynamic Will's going to have with them, because they're both healers. Is he going to be kind of jealous of Bob, who can just touch someone and completely heal them? I can only imagine there's going to be a scene where he and Damison are like nerding out about medical stuff, and Nico and Bob are just sitting there like just staring into obliviousness like, what are these guys saying? Did my face look weird there for a second? I don't know. I haven't been on camera for so long, and even then I'm usually scripted, so I don't know what I'm doing. What else? Oh, right. Apparently Nemesis is going to be in this book, according to, like, the Reed Riordan. Apparently there's an imbalance in Nico's heart. I'm curious to know what that's about. I assume if she appears, she's going to do what she did with Hazel and Leo and take the form of the people that her, I don't say victims, because not everyone who encounters her is a victim of her, but, like, her anybody who looks at her sees the person that they resent the most. I also wonder what kind of message this book is going to have about family, because it keeps on saying these siblings are working together, or their parents and whoever else on the Reed Riordan stuff, the articles. They kept on mentioning that all the different like gods who were working together in this book were related. And like that's not inherently weird on its own. All the gods in Greek mythology are related. What's weird is that they make it so noteworthy that these guys are all working together. So I assume that's going to lead to some kind of, you know, family spat. Probably going to be a pretty funny scene. And I wonder what it's going to mean for Nico's character and whatever lesson he's going to learn about his own family. I wonder what his dynamic with the Centaur Satyr is, because Dionysus has obviously been giving Nico a lot of individual attention, which he usually doesn't do for most campers. I read like the little excerpt on the Reed Riordan site, and I gotta say it's super cute, but there were moments where I was like, this doesn't really sound like a Riordanverse romance. Like when Nico's like, why, oh why, does it feel so good to make him smile or laugh or whatever? It's like, Maybe Riordan and Oshiro can't remember who wrote which parts of that book, but I'm pretty sure Riordan didn't write that. I mean, I know every romance in the Riordanverse is a little bit different, and all the couples have slightly different interactions because they're all different people, but this feels a little weird. But yeah, I can't wait to read about Nico and Will's romance. Hopefully this book says how they got together. Apparently the nymph Jigora, I think that's how it's pronounced, and I'm sorry, is gonna hold them captive, and she's like, tell me everything about your relationship. So we'll see how that goes. Hopefully we'll actually get a story of how Nico and Will got together. I don't personally think that them getting together needs to be a whole major thing, because how they got together is just one part of their relationship. It doesn't define their relationship, but I do still really want to know how they got together. I don't really have any predictions about Bob or Jameson, except for the title, actually, because we all know that's referring to Will as the sun and Nico as the star. But what's weird about that is that in House of Hades, when Percy and Annabeth had to leave Bob behind, he said, say hello to the sun and the stars for me. I'm just worried that that's going to lead to some sort of ending where they have to leave Bob and Jameson behind again, and Bob tells them it's okay because I already got to see the sun and the stars. Or something like that. I'm just throwing stuff out there at this point, but please don't do this to us. I mean, I don't know if Oshiro would make us all suffer this way, but I wouldn't put it past Riordan, so... I think Piper's gonna have a minor role in this book because she was mentioned in the dedication, and I'm also assuming that this book is going to talk more about her identity, so I'm very curious to see where that will go, and I wonder if this book will mention like which label or which labels Piper uses. You know, there's so many out there, both generally and specific to the Native community. There's two-spirited, which is a concept that existed long before colonization, even though the word itself is fairly recent. And it's like an umbrella term because Native people never saw what we would consider queer identities the same way that Europeans did. So the word is something that many Native communities use as an umbrella term to define their identities, or I guess as part of their identities. I know some Native languages have specific words to define two-spiritedness as their specific community saw it. I believe the Cherokee language is one of them, but I'll have to fact check that. There's also the term Indigequeer. There are some Native people who simply prefer to call themselves LGBTQIA+. I will leave some stuff in the description for you to learn about these terms from people who actually have first-hand experience and know what they're talking about. But in a nutshell, I am curious to see what label Piper uses for herself. And I hope it passes the vibe check. I know there are many aspects of how Piper was written that the Cherokee community and the Native community in general disliked, and I'm not justifying that writing. If Piper's identity is brought up in this book, I hope it passes the vibe check. That is, of course, not for me to decide. It's for Cherokee people to decide. But I hope it passes the vibe check. What else? Percy and Annabeth. Okay, this is getting really blurry. I'm so sorry. Percy and Annabeth. Percy and Annabeth need to have a reunion scene with Bob, and maybe Jameson as well. They need this. They need to have that reunion scene. Leaving Bob and Jameson behind was the hardest thing they ever had to do. I'm not expecting Percy and Annabeth to have a big role in this book because I know it's not their story, and that's fine. But they need to have a reunion scene with Bob because they miss him so much, and this matters to them so much. Apparently, like, the first location on, like, the map is the Jackson apartment, so I'm assuming they're gonna see Percy and Annabeth and get some advice from them, but at the same time, aren't Percy and Annabeth in New Rome at this time? Or did they already go back to... Are they what's happening? Am I stupid? Am I missing something? So yeah, that's that. I don't need Percy and Annabeth to have a big role in this book, but I need them to have a scene of reuniting with Bob the Titan because this is something that matters so much to them. Leaving him behind was the hardest thing they ever had to do, and that was like the end of their major character arc. Their deepest, their biggest, and their most recent big character arc was leaving Bob and Jameson behind. So reuniting with Bob and Jameson is going to mean so much to these two. Looking forward to reading it. It's gonna be so exciting. I'll see you guys in a few days, or maybe a few weeks because I'm about to go on vacation, but at some point in the near future, after I've written a review for this book, and gonna actually be scripted next time you see me. Bye! Yes! Yes! My microphone didn't screw up. It was filming this whole time. You guys don't understand, but that makes me really happy because I had to leave earlier today to get a micro SD card. Anyways, bye. Well, that was something. I'm really sad now. Nico books are great fuel for my sadness because I'm really sad. Okay, in complete honesty, I enjoyed this book quite a lot. There were some flaws that I have trouble overlooking, but as usual, Rick Riordan's work has not disappointed, and while I've never read anything else by Mark Oshiro, this was undoubtedly a win for them as well. The story has both great moments and a great overall story, and I think the message was executed really well. Given that Nico is my favorite character, I really enjoyed his character arc and how his relationship with Will progressed, although there were some important things left out in my opinion. So without further ado, let's get into the specifics. I thought the beginning with Chiron and Mr. D was great. It didn't feel slow or boring or anything, and it was genuinely interesting to see how Nico's dynamics with Chiron and Mr. D change over time. It's always kind of cool to see how Chiron interacts with different campers just based on how well he knows them. And of course, Mr. D's blatant favoritism towards Nico will always be welcome in my life, and on my channel, needless to say. The way he puts it at the end is a perfect summary of his character, honestly. All the campers could drown and I wouldn't care, but you two, I prefer if you were the last ones to drown. The Persebeth pep talk, as Nico called it, was really nice. It's always great to see Percy and Annabeth being happy and in love, and Percy being funny and goofy per usual. It was also a little sad though, just to see like the mental toll that Tartarus took on them. Like, it scarred them to the point that when Nico explains the quest, they're both just silent for a long time and then agreed that he must have said tartar sauce instead of Tartarus to avoid talking about it. The fact that they were so reluctant just to talk about it is really telling in terms of how it affected them, so that hit me in the feels a little bit. Obviously, the Solangelo moments in this book were the cutest, nothing but praise to give there. My personal favorites are Will comforting Nico after his nightmares, Will promising that he's not going to trade himself for Bob, the Care Bear moment, the kiss as they leave Gorgira, the trading of keepsakes, Nico saying he loves Will as a promise of hope as they fall into the abyss, and Will's description of love at the end. Just to name a few. It was great to see how these two express their love for each other and learn more about their relationship. I don't know if I have anything else to say about these moments other than they're adorable and I enjoyed them. I also might have to post an updated version of my top 10 Solangelo moments video because I will openly welcome any excuse to talk about these two lovebirds. Side note, it's pretty cool how prior to this book's release, everyone was like, please, for the love of the gods, we need to see a Solangelo kiss in this book. Please, Uncle Rick, we're begging you. And then the book came out and Nico and Will kissed like 12 times throughout. The use of nightmares in this book was great in my opinion. They were a really effective way to build tension and progress the story, as well as reveal more about both of the characters' pasts. The nightmare scenes are definitely some of the ones that I'm going to be rereading over and over again, even though they were just beyond sad, but with Nico reliving memories of his mother and Bianca in nightmare form. Nico having to yell at his sister like, please leave a message, and just screaming to tune her out was so emotional, because earlier on in the same page he is describing how much he misses her, and him having to turn around multiple times to ignore her because that looks and sounds like his sister, but he knows that it isn't her while she's shooting arrows at him. Damn. Also, it's brought up both in this and other books that Nico doesn't remember much about his childhood and his mother, so for him to have some of his favorite memories of her corrupted by Nyx was just horribly cruel. Especially considering how emotional he gets whenever he hears her voice, and in the first nightmare he's just begging her not to go. The way Jason's death was addressed in this book was also quite painful, which is just par for the course at this point, honestly. Nico feeling this emptiness when he dreams about the Cupid scene and Jason isn't there, and saying, it used to be so simple, I just yelled at people whenever they touched me, but now wanting Jason to protectively wrap his arms around him. That was so sweet. Their friendship was so great, my gods. Also, Nico burning with tears while talking about how he couldn't save Jason, even though it wasn't remotely his fault and he was literally at the opposite end of the country at the time and there was nothing he could have done. The point is, I think that's very telling and it reveals something pretty interesting about Nico's character. He says at one point that he feels guilty for what happened to his sister too, even though that wasn't remotely his fault either. Now, I know it isn't exactly surprising for a character in the Riordanverse to feel guilty about a death that wasn't their fault, but Nico feeling responsible for Jason is just next level. As a son of Hades, it actually makes a lot of sense that Nico would feel this way because he can sense death right when it happens. The second a loved one dies, he knows. It may not be the same as actually watching the person die, but in some ways he probably feels like he's actually there when it happens, and thus that there was something he could have done even though there wasn't. I also just find it really sad that he feels responsible for Jason when he was thousands of miles away at the opposite end of the United States. Anyway, those nightmares really hit me in the feels, and I do recognize that that was kind of the point. So, congrats, Rick Riordan. Are you happy with yourself? Still, as far as the story itself, the nightmares did make sense and were well written. Admittedly, there were a few moments in the nightmare scenes that made me think, what? Most notably in Will's nightmare when he mentions that he didn't think he would see his father again for years, if ever, because I don't really feel like that adds up with Apollo's character development in Trials of Apollo. I get it, he can't really be around his kids on a regular basis or anything, but the end of Tower of Nero did imply, at least in my interpretation, that he still planned to visit his kids every once in a while and be a humble father to them. He did grow very close to them during his time on Earth, and the story states explicitly that he plans to visit Meg McCaffrey over the years, so what gives? Granted, Meg is a special case, but still. So for Will to be like, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if I didn't see my dad again for years, if ever, feels wrong. Like, I wouldn't have been surprised if Apollo had made a cameo appearance in this book. He did know the magnitude of the journey that his son was about to undertake, and while he does acknowledge in Tower of Nero that whatever comes next isn't his story, it's weird that he doesn't show up again, not even to, like, wish him luck or anything. However, I must admit that I am still kind of impressed with the nightmares that Ephialtes gave Will, especially the second one. Showing a scene from the last book was clever. I will never turn down an opportunity to reread Meg insulting Apollo. Jump the cow? That was your plan? And I honestly feel like Rachel, Lester, and Meg's behaviors in the dream do kind of parallel their real personalities. I mean, obviously they wouldn't be so heartless outside of the dream, but Meg still has the same attitude. The way she talks is exactly the same as TOA. Obviously Meg would never actually be so mean to anyone other than Lester, but Ephialtes absolutely nailed her personality. Like, damn, I'm low-key impressed. That demon wasn't kidding when they told Nico to do his research. They came prepared. They were beyond prepared. They knew exactly how these characters would really act, and they just blended that with classic nightmare fuel. I know they were evil for most of the book, but I still have to admire the dedication. On the topic of Ephialtes, I think they were pretty epic as far as antagonists go. The scene itself was action-filled and suspenseful. It was hands down one of the best scenes in the first half of the book, and slowly easing into the whole dream thing by starting out with them journeying down multiple times built amazing suspense. Will overcoming Ephialtes with light was glorious, and the whole Care Bear joke that came afterwards is undoubtedly one of the cutest Solangelo moments in the entire story. The Sun and the Star also really improved upon the characters of the troglodytes. In Tower of Nero, I was just like, oh, well, these creatures are annoying. I didn't even mention them in my Tower of Nero video because they didn't seem relevant enough. But they've definitely started to grow on me now. His Majesty is a lovely character, and Screech Bling isn't as annoying as I remember him. Reading about them now from Nico's point of view, they're actually really cool, and they brought some much needed chaos into the story, what with the whole teaching Minoetes as cows marching band tricks. Though the Trog segment of the book was pretty slow, I don't think it had anything to do with the characters themselves because they were pretty interesting. Given the setting, I have no idea if His Majesty is going to pop up in another book, but I just want to say, for the record, that I would totally love it if they did. I genuinely don't know if a character has ever become so likable to me across the course of one book. Maybe Reyna over the course of Blood of Olympus? Obviously there's a boatload of characters I like more than His Majesty, but none of them have climbed the ranks so fast from, oh, you're boring, to you're the sweetest thing I have ever seen in like 100 pages. Yeah, I like Will's character more after reading Sun and the Star, but he was already pretty high up in my ranking of characters. Just had to geek out about His Majesty, but moving on. The Tartarus flashback was well done. It was nice to see Nemesis given some more nuance. I guess you could argue that that part of the book was pretty slow, but I don't see it as a problem. The parts surrounding it, yes, but I think it makes sense for the Tartarus part because it's creating mood. Nico is traveling alone in a barren wasteland. Of course the mood is heavy. It was very sad, although interesting to get to see an earlier version of Nico's character, like Mark of Athena era Nico, because he doesn't have any point of view chapters from that time. So it's cool to see what was going through his head. Also just tragic to read about him just crying as he comes to see Tartarus' true form and he's completely alone. The part at the end with Nyx was pretty intense, with Nico just whimpering at the end and hopelessly thinking about how he failed the 7. That really tugged at my heartstrings. If I'm being completely honest, the only criticism I have of that scene is that they never mentioned ballerinas. Like, it's a small thing and it's petty and I know that, but Ephialtes' stage name joke will never compare to the ballerina joke. It's just too good. I love how I immediately transitioned from talking about my favorite character being in immense pain to complaining that the scene that made him suffer didn't mention ballerinas. It's a Riordan-verse thing. Outsiders wouldn't understand. It's one of the reasons I love these books. You can torture a 14-year-old child and make a genuinely funny crack about ballerinas at the same time. Speaking of classic Riordan-verse stuff that would seem colossally too weird to anyone who isn't familiar with it, let's talk about the Minoetes scene. This is humor. This is god-tier humor. Minoetes' over-the-top personality is hilarious. I gotta appreciate this level of extra. That's all I really have to say. I don't really know why it was necessary to redeem Gurion. Like, I don't see the point. Minotes could just as easily have been dating some random side character who didn't try to kidnap Nico and sell him that one time, but whatever. The scene in Persephone's garden was great. It's cool to see how her opinion of Nico kind of evolved over time, and her scaring the living daylights out of Will, pun intended, was very funny. I find it interesting because I always just assumed that Persephone and Nico still despised each other. They've never canonically had a conversation that wasn't tense and resentful, so the idea that they're just chill now and she doesn't hate him anymore always felt more like a fanon thing to me than anything else. So it's pretty cool and kind of surprising now for it to become canon. As far as the emotional depth of the scene goes, there's some good stuff right there. I like the shift in this book and in Trials of Apollo of treating relationships as something that you continuously have to work on and not just things that magically happen and stay intact. Between Calypso and Leo needing to take time apart to Jason and Piper breaking up and now Nico and Will trying to understand each other better and let each other in, I think it's all very nice. I gotta say, Gorgira as a character really impressed me in some ways. Based on how she was presented in the Read Riordan article prior to this book's release, I expected her to be one of those villain characters who was just really extra, kind of like Epialtes and Epialtes. Really extra, kind of like Epialtes and Otis, but more interested in cute romance than parties. Like, I was just expecting this dramatic fangirl who is invasive and annoying, but also a serious threat to the main characters because she could literally murder them anytime she wants. Instead, she's just a very sweet, lonely nymph who actually has a lot of wise lessons to share. And throughout all her interactions with Will and Nico, there is only one moment when she comes across as even vaguely antagonistic. And even that has more to do with Nico being annoyed with her than anything else. The stories themselves were nice and sweet, not much criticism there. I think the tale about how Nico came out and the stuff that came with it was handled pretty well. The mention of how he had this friend who stopped hanging out with him was a good way to address that, I feel. So often the media is obsessed with squeezing as much suffering and victimhood out of queer characters as possible, especially when it comes to arcs that revolve around them being queer. It could be argued that the Cupid scene does this to some extent, but that's a debate for another day. And while the Sun and the Star undoubtedly squeezed a crap ton of suffering out of Nico, I appreciate that the homophobia was addressed in a more low-key way. Like, it makes sense that this book made Nico suffer, but I really like that when it came to the homophobia, or just fear of being judged for one's sexuality, it was addressed in a more chill way. The book didn't over-victimize Nico by spinning some tragic tale about him getting beat up or relentlessly bullied for being gay. Instead, it just focused on how it hurts to have someone's opinion of you change because they learn you're queer, and it treats that feeling as completely valid. Don't get me wrong, experiences of being physically and verbally attacked like that for who you are very real for many people, and they should be addressed in fiction in order to validate that and offer a vicarious relief to the people who have experienced them. But so often, scenes like this just want to victimize queer characters and portray them as helpless, and I like that the Gorgira scene was more invested in Nico simply talking about it and using that experience to introspect on himself. While we're talking about representation, I really like Piper's discussion of her sexuality, and I personally found it very relatable, but keep in mind that's my perspective as a white person and probably isn't the full take on this matter. If any Cherokee person would like to share their opinions on Piper's scene in this book, or Piper in general, feel free to comment below if you want to share your opinion, but no pressure if you don't, and I want other people to listen to you as well, so if you want, I will pin your comment. I don't actually know if I can pin comments anymore because YouTube has a weird rule about that, but I will make sure people see your comment. We'll figure it out. But yeah, just keep in mind that what I'm about to say is probably not the full picture. Once again, I've linked a few educational resources on the subject in the description. My impression of Piper talking about how she wasn't sure what label to use and the advice Nico gave her was all really nice, affirming, 2 thumbs up. Watching two people from maybe the same community, once again, it's complicated for a lot of Native people. Watching these two awesome, maybe queer people bond over identity was really beautiful, and queer friendships are always so amazing to see when they're well done. The whole learning to tread carefully thing was also relatable, and you have no idea how happy it makes me to actually see words like gay, lesbian, bisexual, pansexual, and queer used in this book. I don't think I can really explain why it means so much to me. I think it's just because queer identities have been censored for so long and are still censored a lot, and when you actually use the words, you're being direct rather than tiptoeing around the subject in some way. It's for that reason that I was excited when the word gay was actually used in Tower of Nero for the first time, and them casually dropping words like gay and bisexual throughout this book was a really nice thing to see. I think the dramatic tension in Tartarus was pretty good. One upside to the book's slower first half is that when they actually got to Tartarus, you knew it was getting real. From their separation, to Will seeing Tartarus' real form, to Nico saving Will at the doorways to the mansion, it all had suspense and a lot of sweet moments. It's interesting to see how they both had dreams about being left behind by the other and falling off a cliff at some point during the voyage. I also have to add that I love how everyone who visits Tartarus is united in the fact that they absolutely must cuddle Small Bob at some point. I remember in House of Hades when Annabeth first sees Small Bob, she fully understands that he might be a horrible demon and she is supposed to be Wisdom's daughter, but she just goes and holds him anyway. She's just so emotionally and physically exhausted at that point that she's like, screw it, I need something cute, get over here and cuddle me. And that seems to have been a mood for our guys in Tartarus, especially Will, so yay. The other thing I want to add is about the Acheron. I'm not so sure how I feel about the fact that the characters just casually sail through it for hours on end, regularly getting close to its edges, and Nico even jumping in it at one point like it's a way smaller deal than it should be. Because that kind of downplays how important the Acheron is. In House of Hades, one of the hardest moments of the journey for Percy and Annabeth was arriving at the Acheron. And Annabeth was just in so much pain, watching the deaths of all the people she couldn't save. I get that it hits different for different people, and I can see why its effects might be particularly acute for the girl whose fatal flaw is hubris, but I still feel like the Sun and the Star just downplayed the Acheron's intensity. There is a whole conversation that could be had about whether or not this book lessened the intensity of Tartarus itself. I didn't really get that impression overall, but the River Acheron was definitely downplayed. I also find it a little strange that Bob just casually brought them up to the surface like, oh yeah, it's fine, I'm a Titan, I know what I'm doing. Because I feel like Heroes of Olympus clearly established that even for super powerful beings like Titans, Tartarus can't easily be escaped, and that for demigods, the doors of death were the only way out. The issue with going to Tartarus in past books was always, it's super hard to escape. So Bob just casually being able to get them out of there feels wrong. The confrontation with Nyx was very intense. I love that it was constantly taking new direction and having new revelations without feeling chaotic or out of place. It was written very well because there were new twists at every moment during that confrontation, but it still always felt like one storyline. It wasn't hard to keep track of what was going on, nor did it feel like anything was included just for shock value. Bob saying he'll always fight for Nico was really special. That tugged at my heartstrings. The revelation of the cacodemons was great. The level of sheer confusion I felt when Nyx introduced them as Nico's children is not something I will easily forget, and I'm sure many others are on that same boat. Nemesis, Hypnos, and Epiales turning on their mother is one of those things that I never would have seen coming, but I'm here for it. And the way they help the group escape at the end feels kind of like something you'd see in an anime show, especially the part where Nemesis turns into Zeus and attacks Nyx. I'm not really into anime, but it gives off that vibe. Nico crying into Will at the end was also very sad. Just letting it all out and then just peacefully falling asleep was lovely. The only other thing I have to say about that part of the book is that Will's hopelessness could have lasted a little longer. It was sad, don't get me wrong, but it had this opportunity to be this really powerful moment with a lot of drama, and instead it was only focused on for like a page before he realizes what's happening. I guess that makes sense, because there was a lot packed into the scene though. Nico naming his demons Cocoa Puffs will never not be fantastic. It just has the perfect energy of a classic Percy Jackson joke. I sincerely hope that this becomes one of the fandom's greatest inside jokes, and I'm kind of sad to know that there's a good chance that it will never be one because no one reads Trials of Apollo for some reason and they're not even going to get to Sun and the Star. The dream near the end of the book was beautiful and, as we've come to expect, very sad. It hurt my heart. Getting to see all four of them reunited and interacting one last time was so sweet and touching. Hades telling Nico how proud he is really shows how much they've both grown over the years, and it's awesome to see that he cares about Nico enough that when Nico brought Will into the underworld, Hades was like, oh no, is he going to lose Will too? He may not be the greatest dad by mortal standards, but all things considered, he's still pretty great. It tugged at my heartstrings a little bit when he said to Maria, sometimes mortals end up paying the price for our actions, and to see her getting defensive of Nico at certain moments, that was really sweet. Nico saying how much he misses Bianca and Maria, and them telling him how strong he is, and Hades saying that Nico should go be with Will because he deserves to be happy and he deserves everything. Yeah, basically the whole scene tugged at my heartstrings. Okay, so let's move on to some of the story's weaknesses now. One of the things I didn't like about this book was the slow pacing for the first half. They definitely could have sped through the mortal segment of the story much more quickly. From the moment they left camp to the moment they entered the underworld, there were no stakes. It was fun to get to learn a little more about Will's past and his mother, but the mortal world part of the story still didn't need to be as long as it was. A lot of the underworld parts of the story before they entered Tartarus were also pretty slow. Like I already said, the scene with Epioles, Minoetes, Persephone, and Gorgira were all good, but the parts with the Trogs could have used more action. The Dracon fight especially needed higher stakes. I mean, we're talking about Dracons, which earlier books go out of their way to paint as intimidating, and the characters beat them in like 2 pages. There was way more that could have happened in that fight. The story definitely could have used more intensity in that scene. Not to mention, Will's injuries were due to the fact that he fell like an idiot. That annoyed me. Like, the Gorgira scenes really emphasized how seriously Will's injuries were affecting him, and the fact that he got them from slipping and falling feels kind of underwhelming, especially considering that there was a Dracon fight right there. The scenes in the Trog's new home also felt a little slow. I mean, Nico is very familiar with this part of the underworld. He knows his way around, so I never really got the impression like him and Will were in real danger. I feel like they could have put more emphasis on the fact that right now the underworld is a danger zone for Nico because he has to hide from Hades, even though he would usually be welcome there. That might have helped. I don't know if it would have taken away from the reveal at the end, though. Anyway, the Trog part of the story needed higher stakes in my opinion. I'm also not a big fan of how this book treats Will like he's the only important person in Nico's life. One of the things I really like about Nico's character is that while romance is important to him, it's not always his source of character development. He can be who he is and grow as a person without romance. In Percy Jackson and Heroes of Olympus, he was motivated by crushes at certain moments, but overall they weren't the main driving force for him, and romantic love had very little to do with his character development. Instead, it was more about learning that his friends and family would watch his back if he just let them in. I think Solangelo is awesome, but Nico has other people in his life too, and it feels kind of like a disservice to his character to pretend otherwise. Don't get me wrong, it's great to see Nico having a book focusing on his relationship with Will, and I have nothing against the fact that Will is the most important person to Nico right now. He's the only person Nico loves whom he sees on a regular basis, and they've been dating for almost a year. Focusing on their relationship makes total sense and is great, and in retrospect, I can understand why things like Reyna becoming a huntress weren't really addressed in this book. It was about him and Will. I mean, I still think there's a conversation that needs to be had between Nico and Reyna, but I can understand why The Sun and the Star was maybe not the right book to have that conversation. What annoys me is that this book seems to pretend that Will was the one and only game changer for Nico, even attributing some parts of Nico's character development that other characters were responsible for to Will. I think I just don't like that this book focuses so strongly on Nico's life so far and how his past has shaped him, but doesn't think pesky little details like Hazel and Reyna are worth mentioning. I mean, to be fair, Jason is mentioned quite a bit, but that's only because he's dead and Nico is still grieving. All that to say, I love that this book is about Solangelo, and I can understand why Hazel and Reyna are not necessarily important to the story, but I do still think they are important enough to Nico that he would mention them in more than just a few throwaway lines. My other criticism is that Will still doesn't have enough of a backstory and should be treated as more than just Nico's boyfriend. It's one of those things that I noticed was lacking in Trials of Apollo, but I didn't really care because Nico and Will aren't the main characters of those books, so I knew it didn't really make sense to expect much in the ways of a Will Saul's backstory. But this book does focus on him, and he still doesn't have enough of a backstory. He's starting to have one, and I'm starting to see where some future character arcs for him could go, but we just aren't there yet. His main arc in this book is about his relationship with his boyfriend and trying to understand him better. Yes, Nico's character arc is also tied to their relationship, but he also has this whole other, more important character arc about living with his past rather than pushing it away. Will's arc is inextricably tied to their relationship, and he still has yet to develop as a character beyond that. Traveling around with his mom as a kid and singing her songs a few times throughout the book was really nice, but that on its own doesn't constitute a backstory. I'm not trying to compare him to Nico, who has had way more time than him to develop a complicated history. I'm also not trying to say that the death or abuse of a loved one is a prerequisite for having a backstory in the Riordanverse, but as much as a happy, cheerful past is nice to see with demigods who are usually miserable, it doesn't leave much room for character development. I also don't think that him getting attacked by Stymphalian birds constitutes a backstory, because that's just the story of his first monster attack. Every demigod has one. Almost every demigod is terrified their first time. Almost every demigod finds it impossibly difficult to process. And I doubt it's uncommon or surprising for demigods to develop a particular fear of the first monster they ever faced. I'm not saying it's pathetic or stupid for Will to be afraid of Stymphalian birds, considering how terrifying that day was for him, but that's just the Will Solace version of something that all demigods experience. There's nothing wrong with including it, but again, it doesn't really constitute a backstory on its own. There needs to be more to it than that, and if Will is in future books, I hope we get more. The only other semi-negative thing I have to say about this book is that I don't really understand why there was all this focus on one character taking care of the other. Of Nico being like, Will usually takes care of me, but this time I'll have to watch his back, and I guess we're back to our old roles, and whatever else. Because in a healthy relationship, you look after each other. I get that it's more or less a joke at the end, and after everything he's been through, Nico deserves someone to take care of him, but still. Anyway, all things said and done, I guess I should add that the overall message of the story was executed pretty well, and I like the idea behind it. It's something I strongly agree with on a lot of levels. I don't know if there's much of a point in elaborating on why, because the story itself isn't exactly subtle. But yeah, it's a great message, it was written nicely per usual, and the end of the book being more about hope than happiness was also a big thumbs up. And after spending so long being afraid of happiness, Nico choosing not to be happy but to stick to the possibility of happiness, no matter what comes next, is fitting character growth. The question of whether or not there will be something that comes next for Solangelo in future books, or even if there will be future books in this universe at all after Chalice of the Gods comes out, is an interesting one that I plan to look at in a future video. But for now, I guess I need to end this video. Man, have I really forgotten how to do this? Okay, see you all next time. Bye. Ciao. Adieu. You can go now.